Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. We are diving back into Peerless, and I'm super excited. Today we're going to be covering chapters 50 through 53. So I hope you all enjoy, and let's just go ahead and get into it, shall we? Chapter 50. According to Zhong Haomiao, Yan Xuexing hadn't returned to Qiyue Monastery after he left the banquet. As for his current whereabouts, he didn't know those either. Barring those in seclusion, disciples of any sect were largely sent to wander the lands after their graduation. Perhaps Yan Xuexing had gone on his way south to Chun, or perhaps somewhere else. In any case, he might no longer even be in Qianmo. As he spoke, Zhong Haomiao became increasingly agitated. Yan Xuexing, he insisted, would never harm innocents. He was a member of a renowned sect who had saved his abbot's life. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps the man who'd come to the banquet hadn't been Yan Xuexing at all. He could insist all he liked, but they had to find this Yan Xuexing. He was the key to getting answers to their questions. Not only was a perfectly lovely banquet ruined, Xing Mao was now in a mountain of trouble. He sighed, frazzled, then cupped his hands toward Duan Qihu and Gao Yi. "I'm afraid I've made a fool of myself and allowed you to witness something disgraceful. Thanks to me, Duan Xiong received a terrible scare. I earnestly apologize. Once this matter is resolved, I'll offer you both a formal apology in your own homes. I beg your forgiveness." He turned to his head steward. "Open the storehouse. Bring out 2 treasures." Xing Mao's grandfather had been the ruler of a once prosperous nation. Though his glory was diminished, his wealth still rivaled that of any monarch. In the storehouse of the Xing residence were treasures Duan Qihu might not obtain within 3 lifetimes of hard work. But Duan Qihu snorted coldly. "Please, don't trouble yourself. I'll be taking my leave. Sincerely hope Duke Xing will come to explain himself soon." He turned and stalked toward the door, unwilling to remain a moment longer. Duan Qihu had indeed believed Xing Mao initially had no intention of killing him. He wouldn't have attended the banquet otherwise. But after the maid's poisoning plot had been exposed, he'd seen the ruthlessness in Xing Mao's eyes, saw him itching to finish things then and there. In fairness, Duan Qihu might have done the same thing himself. If not for Feng Xiao's timely intervention, Duan Qihu's body would likely be cooling on the floor of the hall. As he passed, he nodded slightly to Feng Xiao and Cui Buchu in gratitude. He had his own doubts about their identities. The idea that a nobleman from Kucha could conduct an impromptu autopsy was preposterous. But there was no point in pursuing it now. Still, Duan Qihu would certainly send a few people to investigate them thoroughly when things calmed down. Just as he stepped over the threshold, a voice called out. "Please wait, Duan Xiong," said Cui Buchu behind him. Duan Qihu didn't so much as turn his head. He climbed up into his carriage without hesitation, only to be promptly treated to another taste of Feng Xiao's strength. Feng Xiao seemed to drift over like a gentle breeze. Before the guards could blink, he'd grabbed Duan Qihu's arm. Duan Qihu practiced the Vajra finger technique. He was a first-rate expert who'd defeated countless opponents in his early days. Though he'd let himself go a bit in the last few years, he hadn't forgotten how many wanted him dead and never neglected his martial arts. He instinctively moved to block. Too late. Numbness spread through his arm, and he was forced to turn and face Cui Buchu. Cui Buchu ignored Feng Xiao's raised eyebrows, which seemed to be saying, "There, that should be enough respect for you, shouldn't it?" Cui Buchu spoke directly to Duan Qihu. "Did you know Yushu wants you dead?" "Who's Yushu?" Duan Qihu frowned in confusion. Cui Buchu had meant to catch Duan Qihu off guard. No matter how cunning one was, if they weren't expecting the question, their face would normally give something away. But Duan Qihu showed no reaction. He really didn't know Yushu. Now that was strange. He didn't know Yushu, yet Yushu had asked the 3rd steward to kill him. Cui Buchu changed tack. "Is there some grudge between Duan Xiong and Yan Xuexing?" Over the past few decades, my activities have been confined to the border. Perhaps the Tianshan sect might hold a grudge against me, but I don't know a single soul from Linchuan Academy. I'm grateful for your help today, but this incident took place at the Xing residence. You should be asking Xing Mao instead. He turned coolly and stepped into the carriage. This time, Feng Xiao didn't stop him. He and Cui Bichu watched the carriage roll away. If he doesn't know Yu Xiu or Yan Xuexing, why did his face twitch earlier? Feng Xiao was now fully invested. Does he know who wants him dead? Xing Mao couldn't detain his guests forever. After Duan Qihu's departure, Gao Yi, Cui Bichu, and the other guests also departed one by one. The lively and bustling banquet thus went out with a whimper. Xing Mao was deeply vexed. He'd planned to use this occasion to make his mother happy while also reinforcing his prestige. Not only had he failed to achieve either goal, he'd been disgraced before all of Qianmo. News of his third steward's death would spread rapidly through the city, and everyone would know his subordinates were disloyal. Soon, they'd start saying he wanted to off Duan Qihu and Gao Yi and snatch Qianmo for himself. If that had really been Xing Mao's plan, it would be one thing. The problem was he hadn't planned any of it, yet he had no explanation to offer. Duan Qihu would resent him for this. Perhaps he'd even start plotting his downfall. Master, a visitor has arrived. The head steward came forward and held out a note one-handed. Feng Xiao had broken his arm in their earlier tussle, but he had been too busy seeing off guests to tend to it properly and had only managed a hasty bandaging job. Turn him away! Xing Mao waved a hand, distracted and restless. He didn't even glance at the note. The head steward hesitantly spoke up again. He said if you saw the note, you'd definitely see him. Xing Mao snatched the note and opened it. His mouth fell open in shock. Master? Xing Mao folded the note firmly. Show him in. The visitor was quickly brought into the hall. This newcomer was a slender and graceful man. On entering, he removed his veil hat in deference toward his host. Xing Mao couldn't care less about the man's appearance, but at the sight of his face, he said, You're not a Gokturk. I don't look like a Gokturk. The man's voice was gentle, but that's not important. I imagine Duxing is in a foul mood. I'd hoped not to bother you. Spare me your dithering, Xing Mao interrupted. The visitor smiled, paying no mind to Xing Mao's rudeness. His tone was amiable as he said, I only wish to say that Duxing has missed an exceptional opportunity. Now that Duan Qihu doubts you, I fear if you don't make a move, he'll make one first. You think to provoke me? You're 100 years too early. I won't cooperate with a Gokturk, and I don't need one to tell me what to do. The man smiled. Duxing has overseen this city so assiduously for so long. Have you really never thought of restoring the glory of your ancestors? Does Duxing imagine the Emperor of Sui will leave Qianmo untouched? The moment he gains the upper hand over the Gokturks, he will next recapture Qianmo. When the time comes, I fear Duxing will walk the same path as his grandfather and become a stray dog. Xing Mao's face contorted in fury. Get the hell out! At Xing Mao's shout, guards rushed into the hall, but they had yet to lay hands on the visitor when a strong wind sent them flying. Stunned, the head steward grabbed at the man with his uninjured hand. He moved with immense speed, too fast to see clearly. But the man not only saw, he grasped the chief steward's wrist. Using only his thumb and forefinger, he snatched it with a crack. Now both the chief steward's hands were useless. Xing Mao's mouth snapped shut. No longer did he scream at the man to get out. For all he knew, his martial arts were comparable to Feng Xiao's. The entire Xing family combined might be no match for him. Seeing that Xing Mao was finally listening attentively, the guest sighed and revealed a mocking smile that seemed to ask, regretting it now? How much does Duxing know about the couple who claimed to be the nephew of the king of Kucha and his wife? Xing Mao frowned. I knew they were suspicious. Could they be Duan Qihu's people? The visitor shook his head. After Yang Jian ascended the throne, he established the Zhejiang Bureau to neutralize his enemies and expand his intelligence network. In turn, Empress Dugu established the Zuoye Bureau. They are two distinct organizations, but their roles are highly similar. Not only are they possessed of great authority, they also have the prerogative to act first and report later. They're sharp, cunning, and well-versed in the ways of deceit. He continued, as for that couple, one is the deputy chief of the Zhejiang Bureau and the true power in the organization. The other is the head of the Zuoye Bureau. Do you think they showed up here today just to partake of your fine wine? He watched Xing Mao's eyes widen with astonishment. Xing Mao didn't speak for a long while as he digested this information. You're telling me the Emperor of Sui sent them here? The visitor's lips curved. He who strikes first strikes last. Duke Xing, perhaps now we can sit down for a nice chat? While Xing Mao was meeting with his mysterious visitor, Feng Xiao and Cui Bichu had regrouped at their room in the inn. The banquet was planned to last until the evening, finishing with singing and dancing. Now, of course, the festivities had all been abandoned. It was afternoon when they returned, the sun bright and skies clear. A small vase of pale yellow flowers sat on the windowsill, swaying in the breeze. But they were in no mood to admire them. Before them lay a complex case. Lifting his brush, Cui Bichu wrote down a list of names. His hands were lovely as they moved across the paper, the characters beneath beautiful and fluid as flowing water. Though Feng Xiao felt that the loveliness of Cui Bichu's hands couldn't compare to that of his own, he could still appreciate a change in scenery from time to time. He watched with rapt attention, his smile wreathing his face. First, Cheng Cheng and Xing Mao's broker had perished in the fire at the pawn shop. Then they'd seen Yu Shu and the third steward talking in the streets. Finally, the assassination of Duke Qihu had failed, but the third steward had been found hanging in the woodshed. When Cui Bichu finished, he circled Yu Shu's name. Let's assume Yu Shu has a grudge against Duan Qihu and wishes to incite the third steward to kill him, then frame Xing Mao for the deed. He has no need to kill Cheng Cheng and Li Fei. Feng Xiao agreed. I only fought Yu Shu briefly, but I could tell he's a proud person. Insignificant nobodies like Cheng Cheng and Li Fei are beneath him. Same with the third steward. If Yu Shu wanted him dead, he would simply kill him. Why waste all that time and energy to make it look like he'd hung himself? Why write those words on his palms? It's ineffective and unnecessary. Duan Qihu claims he doesn't know Yu Shu, and that's probably the truth. But then why was he surprised when he heard Yan Xuexing's name? Could he know Yan Xuexing instead? Feng Xiao shook his head. Chu, don't you know? There's a problem clever people often have. Go on, said Cui Bichu. They think too much, Feng Xiao said, and they end up going in circles. That's two problems. Feng Xiao pretended not to hear. Have you thought of trying a different angle? These may be two separate cases. One, Yu Shu colluded with the third steward to murder Duan Qihu. Two, the deaths of Cheng Cheng, Li Fei, and the third steward. It's a good idea, but if you figured it out, does that mean you're not clever? Feng Xiao's smile was so radiant it put the vase of yellow flowers to shame. It means I'm even cleverer than a clever person. Cui Bichu had encountered many shameless men and women, but he'd never encountered someone who was both this shameless and had the nerve to spend the entire day flaunting it in front of him. He averted his eyes, lest he be tempted to slap that radiant smile off Feng Xiao's face. Thanks to the death of the third steward, the antipathy between Duan Qihu and Xing Mao has deepened. They were already at odds. Now a single spark will send everything up in flames. When you put it like that, I feel like you're up to something, said Feng Xiao. Aren't you? Well, what's in it for me? Cui Bichu made a swift decision. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even blink as he said, Daddy. Wait, what? Just why? Okay. Ever since Feng Xiao had called Cui Bichu Daddy thrice, he seemed to have developed an obsession with the moniker. Every now and then, he tried to make Cui Buchu say it. Your dad's dead. I don't want to be your daddy anymore. Cui Buchu cocked his head and looked confused. Then would you rather be my mother? Feng Xiao's mouth twitched. I'm not keen on being your mother either. Tell me what you're planning first. The corners of Cui Buchu's mouth turned up. Go big or go home. How do you feel about unifying Qianmo and returning it to the oversight of the imperial court? Chapter 51. Qianmo lay in the vast Gobi Desert, surrounded by endless sand. Even the closest settlement, Liugong City, was 2 days' travel away. The court was determined to hold onto this oasis waypoint, and thus Gao Yi had been sent to stake their claim. Alas, Gao Yi was incompetent. He'd allowed Xing Mao and Duan Qihu free run of the city for years without making a peep. He cowered in his office like a tortoise, hoping their strife wouldn't touch him. Feng Xiao's group of 4 was only passing through on their journey to distant Xuyab, where they were to meet Appa Kagan and convince him to cooperate with the Sui dynasty. But on arriving in Qianmo, the chief of the Zuoye Bureau, Taoist Master Cui, once again couldn't suppress his restless itch to make trouble. A small disturbance wasn't enough. If he were to do something, it'd be earth-shaking. He'd bag Qianmo in one fell swoop, a feat even the court couldn't manage, and bring the whole county under direct control of the Sui Empire. Even Feng Xiao, who feared neither heaven nor earth and was only too happy to raise hell when he had nothing better to do, was shaken by his audacity. I see your appetite knows no bounds. If a border general or powerful martial artist had proposed such a thing, it wouldn't have sounded quite so outlandish. But Cui Buchu was sickly. Most days, he looked like he might not last the night. To think he still had such ambitions. Is Deputy Chief Feng afraid? Asked Cui Buchu. Feng Xiao smiled. I've never known the meaning of afraid. But this isn't something you can do alone. Trying to drag me down with you, Cui Buchu gave him a queer look. Drag you down? I'm offering to split a fortune with you. If you succeed, it will be a tremendous achievement. Aren't you always angling for merits? On this trip, we'll not only persuade Appa Kagan to become our ally, we'll expand the reach of the Sui dynasty here in Qianmo. The city has a magistrate from the imperial court, but it's never truly been under the oversight of a dynasty of the Central Plains. If we seize it for the throne for the first time, it will be a grander accomplishment than simply reclaiming lost territory. Feng Xiao knew all this already, but with great reward came great risk. Xing Mao and Duan Qihu were no pushovers. They wouldn't release their territory and influence without a fight. What's your plan? The 3 factions have never coexisted peacefully, Cui Buchu explained. The events of the banquet will linger as a thorn in their hearts. Even if Duan Qihu hasn't accused him outright, he must suspect Xing Mao ordered his poisoning and had the stewards silenced when it failed. Duan Qihu's been a lawless force on the borderlands for a few decades. It wouldn't be out of question for him to take the initiative and end Xing Mao, but Xing Mao will also worry about that possibility. Perhaps he'll be the one to move first. Correct. This is our opportunity. We only need to persuade Gao Yi and wait until one side weakens the other. When they least expect it, we'll subdue them and absorb their forces. Once one's taken care of, the other won't pose a problem. Gao Yi is a toothless, bumbling old fool content with muddling his way through life. Why would he risk standing with you against Duan Qihu and Xing Mao? Cui Buchu smiled mysteriously. Everyone has their weaknesses. I know how to deal with Gao Yi. But we can't rely solely on his men. They're not enough. Feng Xiao paused. It's getting late. We should bathe and go to bed. He stood and was about to walk out when a hand grabbed his sleeve. The sun hasn't even set. What's the rush? Let's talk a little more. Feng Xiao's expression was unreadable. I fear if we continue, you're going to suck me dry. Cui Buchu's smile grew brighter. There are troops stationed in Liugong City, but Gao Yi has no authority to mobilize them. I happen to know Deputy Chief Feng also holds the illustrious title of Zhenxi General and carries a military tally personally bestowed by the Emperor. You can mobilize the army. Quality over quantity. How about 1,000 elite soldiers? Surely that's no problem. Were you already thinking about this when we were in Liugong City? How could I be? Suibuchu blinked innocently. I'm not a prophet. It's not as if I knew what would happen at the banquet. Feng Xiao chuckled. He didn't believe a word this man said. Give me your Zuoye chief token then, and you'll owe me a favor. I can't give you my token, but I can owe you a favor. If you like, we'll cooperate with the Zhejiang Bureau on future cases. Don't forget, you'll also get a piece of the credit for this. Credit? Feng Xiao snorted. I have the authority to mobilize troops, but if this goes sideways, the blame will fall on me. If that's all you have to offer, I'm not convinced. With a sigh, Suibuchu fished out an exquisitely crafted little seal from his sleeve. My personal seal. I'll leave it in your hands for now. Once this is over, you return the seal to me. Will that do? Feng Xiao took the seal and turned it over. It was carved with 4 words. Seal of Cui Buchu. Your name really is Cui Buchu? He asked, confused. All this time, he'd assumed Cui Buchu was an alias. Who had a name like I Won't Go? But if it appeared on his personal seal, it must be his actual name. Of course, said Suibuchu. I've been using it since I was 10. What about before you were 10? I forgot, he said, deflecting the question. Feng Xiao smiled and tucked the seal into his sleeve. Fine. Since you've shown me your sincerity, I'd be rude to refuse you. But even if I ride as swiftly as possible, it'll take 2 days to travel to Liugong City and 2 to travel back. If I go and Fo'er shows up during that time, I fear the 3 of you will be at his mercy. This was indeed a problem. Suibuchu smiled. I have a solution. No can do, said Feng Xiao. I haven't even told you, said Feng Xiao. How can you reject it? You don't need to say it. I already know. You want to give Qiaoshan my tally so she can bring the troops from Liugong City. Qiaoshan is trustworthy. To you, not to me. The 2 of them locked eyes, silence stretching between them. Feng Xiao's frank words didn't offend Suibuchu. If he were offended so easily, he could never have crossed the threshold of the Zuoye Bureau, let alone become its Lord Chief. He and Feng Xiao were in the same boat now, but it was a temporary alliance. Even the Emperor and Empress, known for their matrimonial harmony, kept their guard up to some degree. If Empress Dugu really trusted that the Emperor would never betray her, she wouldn't have created the Zuoye Bureau. As for Feng Xiao and Suibuchu, such wariness went without saying. Today, the 2 of them got along swimmingly. Feng Xiao was even escorting Suibuchu to treat with the Gokturks. But not long ago, they'd been cheerfully plotting against each other and trying to do each other in. Feng Xiao refused to believe Suibuchu had forgotten the incense incident already. Suddenly, Suibuchu laughed. I'll be here with Deputy Chief Feng as a hostage. Surely you aren't worried Qiaoshan will run off with the tally. You're ruthless toward others, but even more toward yourself. Never mind a tally. To gain my trust, you subjected yourself to instance of helplessness. Suibuchu rolled his eyes. I only do what I'm confident will bring me success. I'm not a reckless lunatic. Tell the truth. Have I upset your plans so often you've grown frightened? Feng Xiao's answer was blunt. Yes. Suibuchu was silent. I'll hand the tally to one of my own agents, said Feng Xiao. He will accompany Qiaoshan to Liugong City to summon the troops. It was a concession. Deal, said Suibuchu happily. Feng Xiao was still skeptical that Suibuchu could persuade Gao Yi. The man was timid as a mouse and content with the status quo. Unless something forced his hand, Gao Yi would never involve himself. How are you confident you can persuade Gao Yi? Suibuchu raised 3 fingers. I have 3 plans for dealing with him, ranked from best to worst. Plans A, B, and C. Start with the worst one, Plan C. We march straight to the door, reveal our identities, then put a blade to his throat and force him to obey. Feng Xiao shook his head. You can't guarantee Xingmao and Duan Qihu's situation will escalate to open conflict. Even if you threaten Gao Yi, it won't do any good. He has the least of men out of the 3 of them. What's Plan B? Use some incense of helplessness on Xing Mao and Duan Xihu. Make them come to us, begging and crying. We'll have subdued our enemies without a fight. Feng Xiao scrutinized Cui Buchu with the same incredulity as if a flower had suddenly sprouted on his face. Do you spend all your days thinking of ways to screw me over? Is Deputy Chief Feng a fool? Do you spend all your days being screwed over by me? Feng Xiao snorted. Do you think incense of helplessness is like fried flatbread from a stall? Cost mere coppers, and you order as much as you want? Its formula is exceedingly complicated. I only brought half a vial with me. Even the Jiejian Bureau might not have any more. Left unsaid was that this half vial had already been used on Cui Buchu. Cui Buchu shrugged. Then there's only plan A. Feng Xiao waited. When Cui Buchu explained no further, he sighed regretfully. Not because he thought Cui Buchu's plans were bad. Cui Buchu was too good at spotting even the tiniest changes in people. All their weaknesses became his to exploit in his bid to achieve his goals. It was truly a shame that a man like Cui Buchu couldn't practice martial arts. If he could, there'd be no one he couldn't handle and nothing he couldn't do. Feng Xiao sighed because he thought it was a pity for Cui Buchu. Cui Buchu was a worthy rival. For some, the weaker their opponent, the better. But Feng Xiao was the opposite. The stronger his opponent, the more he relished the fight. Only like this would life be entertaining. This deep at night, there wasn't a sound to be heard. Though merchants from across the land flocked to Tianmo and the city had no curfew, most retired early. Even pleasure seekers entertained themselves largely within the walls of brothels. Once the hour passed 10, the streets were deserted save for the night watchmen. Now and then a dog might bark in the distance as each house doused their fires and tucked themselves into bed, sinking into sweet slumber. Feng Xiao, too, was asleep at this hour. He was a brilliant martial artist, but he wasn't a god. He needed his rest as much as anyone. Yet tonight, he slept fitfully. Like many martial artists, his preternaturally sharp hearing picked up even the softest of sounds. And at that moment, a very distracting sound indeed was coming from outside the inn. Help me. Please help me. I'm begging you. Help me. It was a woman's voice, barely audible, brimming with hatred and resentment. To those who listened closely, it seemed to echo with endless grievances. Though it was late spring, a chill clung to the nights. That voice made one's very bones tremble. Who would cry for justice in the middle of the night? And who would run to a well behind an inn, rather than shouting for it at the county office? The answer was obvious. The cries came not from a living person, but from a ghost. Feng Xiao sighed. He gave up on sleep and sat up. Whoever had disturbed his rest, he'd beat them until there wasn't enough left to make a second ghost. But before that, he patted the shoulder of the man beside him. Wake up. There's a ghost outside. If he couldn't sleep, no one else would either. Cui Buchu rolled over, put his back to Feng Xiao, and tugged the blanket right over his head. Rousing Cui Buchu wasn't impossible, but Feng Xiao knew it would put him in a foul mood. And whenever Cui Buchu was in a foul mood, he started laying traps for Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao wasn't afraid of traps. On the contrary, he quite enjoyed matching wits with Cui Buchu. But he just won a round that day, obtaining not only Cui Buchu's personal seal, but also a favor from the Zuoyue Bureau. He decided to quit while he was ahead and enjoy his victory for a few days at least. He thought for a moment, then switched tactics. Feng Xiao walked over to the clothes rack where his jacket hung and picked up the basin of water he'd used to wash his feet before bed. He crossed to the window, then flung the contents of the basin in the direction of the dry well. In a shrill falsetto, he exclaimed, "Who's that blubbering and howling in the middle of the night, disturbing a good lady's rest?" Sir. Chapter 52. It was a cold night, heavy with dew and filled with murmurs and wails of ghosts. Drifting between dreams and waking, the guests at the inn heard a voice that sounded both very near and terribly distant. It blew in with the chill wind, sweeping into their rooms and under their blankets, funneling into their ears and shaking them out of slumber. Then came Feng Xiao's shout. Even the ghost was shocked into silence, never mind the living. Cui Buchu wasn't a corpse, and he shared a room with Feng Xiao. He, too, jerked awake. Due to his poor health, whenever he was woken abruptly, his heart pounded like a drum. This time was no exception. Feng Xiao looked over, his face the very picture of innocence. "Did I wake you? Sorry, I was yelling at someone outside. You should sleep a little longer." He'd expected Cui Buchu to explode, but as the seconds ticked past, Cui Buchu remained on the bed, clutching his blanket in drowsy bewilderment. Had Cui Buchu been shocked silly by his shouting? Feng Xiao stepped over to the bed and took hold of Cui Buchu's chin, turning Cui Buchu's face toward him. Cui Buchu was like this whenever he woke up. How long his days lasted depended on whether he'd had enough sleep. And right then, it was clear sleep was sorely lacking. It was at times like this that Cui Buchu's guard was at its lowest and he became easier to bully. Feeling mischievous, Feng Xiao patted his head. "My good child," he said in a kindly tone. "Time to get up and see some ghosts." Finally, Cui Buchu's gaze sharpened. He slapped Feng Xiao's hand away and sighed. "Not only must we see ghosts, we'll have to become them." To anyone else, he'd have seemed to be speaking nonsense. But Feng Xiao not only took his meaning, he thought it deeply interesting. "Has someone come up with the same plan as you?" Cui Buchu didn't answer. "Do you remember when we first checked in? The guide Chung Chung mentioned there was a ghost behind the inn, and that they'd found a body in the well. I looked into it. Apparently a couple of bones were found at the bottom. No one can say when they appeared or who left them. They may have been tossed in after the victim's death, or the victim may have been thrown in and died down there. The incident was a long time ago, and no one stepped forward to identify the body, so the whole thing was clumsily covered up." Cui Buchu rubbed his eyes as if he were trying to wipe away his fatigue. When Chung Chung mentioned the dry well that day, he looked terrified. Feng Xiao continued in a meaningful tone. But when others talked about it, they seemed more curious than afraid. "The dry well, Chung Chung, Li Fei, the third steward, Duan Qihu," Cui Buchu said. Could there be some link between all of them? Li Fei and the third steward were Xing Mao's men. They shouldn't have any connection to Duan Qihu. But the third steward colluded with Yu Xiu to poison Duan Qihu. Xing Mao definitely didn't order him to do so. It's possible the others share some connection we're not aware of. Cui Buchu wasn't the only one awakened by Feng Xiao's cries. Several more guests stumbled groggily from their beds to complain. Who was shouting crude words outside, disturbing the whole inn? A few brave souls rose and threw on their clothes, thinking to go see what had happened at the well. Through it all, the instigator sat at the table, sipping cold tea at his leisure. Look at me. If I went to play a ghost now, would I be more convincing than the one we heard earlier? Feng Xiao had removed the disguise Qiao Xian had created for him. His uncombed hair hung loose over his shoulders, and he sat at the table in a single thin robe, not seeming to feel the cold. His handsome face glowed in the candlelight, practically flawless. Cui Buchu watched him for a moment. "Put on a layer of pearl powder. Then you'll look the part." "Ah, you're right," Feng Xiao said with a smile. "I'll get some from Qiao Xian." With that, he really did stand and start to walk out. But as he reached the door, he remembered something and turned. "By the way, when I came back this evening, I noticed Yushu's room was empty. He's probably gone." Cui Buchu frowned slightly. A mysterious man. Now even his whereabouts were unknown. If there existed anyone in this world Cui Buchu couldn't figure out, Yu Xiu was undoubtedly one such man. The Jade of Heaven Lake had been recovered, and the case closed. Yu Xiu had no call to remain in Liugong City. They had expected him to return to the capital and the Prince of Jin's side, but he hadn't done so. Instead, he'd gone west and incited the third steward to poison Duan Qihu. But Duan Qihu didn't know Yushu. What grudge did Yushu have against him? What was his goal? Did the haunting of the inn involve him as well? And if not, who was responsible? The tiny city of Qianmo had an incredible number of secrets. They had fermented in the dark for years. And now they were bubbling over. With Cui Buchu and Feng Xiao joining the fray, the city was sure to get even livelier. Cui Buchu slowly pushed aside the covers and bent to pull on his boots. A sudden gust of wind blew the window open with a bang, and the candle guttered and went out. Feeble moonlight fell across the stark white face outside. Chu, chu. For a moment, Cui Buchu didn't answer. Then he said impassively, "I told you to go scare Gao Yi, not me." Duan Qihu sat before a jug of wine. He'd once been a highwayman, in plain speech, a thief and a murderer. Those who lived in fertile lands enjoyed a life free of restraint, feasting and drinking, repaying kindness with kindness and grudge with grudge. That was the hallmark of a true man, they'd boast. Duan Qihu, however, wasn't a drinker. In his view, alcohol corroded the mind and led people unwittingly to their deaths. He'd lost several companions to drink in his youth, and from that point on, he hadn't touched a drop. Yet today, he was restless, so much so that he turned to a flask of wine to ease his worries. He had started with nothing to his name and clawed his way to his position today. He'd lost much, but also gained greatly, and made just as many friends as enemies. Many wished for his death, but Duan Qihu had never cared. He laughed at them in contempt. They were beneath his notice, not worth mentioning. But today was different. When his beloved concubine pushed the door open with a pot of sugar-braised pears, she found Duan Qihu staring solemnly at the table as if something extraordinary sat upon it. "My lord?" Her syllables were drawn out, with a hint of sweet coquettishness. Normally, upon hearing her voice, Duan Qihu would have already stood with a smile on his face. But tonight he remained motionless. Now faintly displeased, the concubine stepped forward and set down the pears, ready to drape herself over him. There was a soft thud as ceramic met wood. It wasn't loud, but Duan Qihu flinched as if startled. When he raised his head to see the face of his concubine mere inches away, he jerked back in his seat, his face twisting ferociously. His concubine had never seen such an expression on him and gaped in shock. In the next moment, a sharp pain tore through her stomach and the scenery blurred as Duan Qihu kicked her toward the door, which slammed open as she crashed heavily to the ground. She spat a mouthful of blood, her face a mask of fear, before promptly fainting from the pain. The servants guarding the door were stunned. Thinking there was some emergency inside, they rushed in and found Duan Qihu still sitting, face pale and chest heaving. "My lord, go! It's nothing." Duan Qihu waved the servants off. "Have someone take her away." When his wife heard the news, she hurried over, thinking the concubine had done something to anger him. Duan Qihu particularly favored this concubine, to the extent of ignoring his wife. This had eaten at Lady Duan for a long time. Though she looked worried now, she was secretly delighted. But Duan Qihu had no interest in women's squabbles. Lady Duan, too, he dismissed with a few words. Nor did he call another concubine to serve him. He rose and went into the garden to relax. The hour was late, and all was dark and silent, but the lanterns hanging in the garden illuminated the area brightly. This alone was evidence of the wealth and strength of the Duan family. Duan Qihu walked for some time with his hands behind his back. Slowly, he regained his calm, but his mood was terrible. What he hadn't told anyone was that in the moment he glimpsed his concubine, he'd seen another face. Perhaps he was overtired, or perhaps it was the lingering influence of the incident at the banquet. Duan Qihu's brow furrowed again as he thought of the dead third steward, as well as the man mentioned by the Qiyue monastery disciple, Yan Xuexing. "Duan Qihu," a mournful voice wailed beside his ear. It sounded like a woman, gasping out her last words as someone tightened their hands around her neck. On the brink of death, yet forcing her eyes open, blood trickling from the corners of her mouth and staining her teeth as she spat and hissed from the depths of hell. "Who's there? Fuck off! Don't skulk around like a ghost!" Duan Hu roared. Behind him, the two servants accompanying their master exchanged a glance. They hadn't heard anything at all. Chapter 53. Duan Hu's words had no effect on the miserable whales. They came again and again, just at the edges of his hearing. First they seemed to be ahead of him, then to his left, his right. But no matter which way he looked, Duan Hu couldn't discover the source. Eerie still was that he seemed to be the only one who could hear. The two servants behind him looked bewildered, unsure to whom he spoke. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Someone was playing tricks on him. Breathing harshly, Duan Hu fought to remain calm. His eardrums throbbed, and the flames of his rage threatened to burst even as he tamped them down. Yet not only did his emotions not settle, his eyes reddened as his panic grew. "Which great master wishes to see me?" he roared. "Show yourself! Why use such cowardly tactics? It's laughable!" "Duan Hu, do you remember? You owe me a life." "I owe many lives. Not everyone is qualified to claim theirs." Duan Hu threw his head back in an icy laugh. His lavish city clothes couldn't disguise the bandit's swagger born of decades on the roads. The imperious nature that had made him famous was on full display. The two servants locked eyes, their faces full of terror. Duan Hu seemed to be talking to the air, an illusion only he could see and no one else. They suspected their master had been possessed. Duan Hu, however, knew this wasn't a case of possession. The culprit had to be a master martial artist masquerading as a ghost, using their internal energy to manipulate sound and confuse his senses. He closed his eyes and listened. Then he leapt into the air, soaring up into a nearby osmanthus tree. Its branches bore no flowers at this time of year. Osmanthus trees weren't suited to the desert, but with enough money, even ghosts might do your bidding, never mind a humble tree. It grew in the Duan family garden just as it would in a misty Jiangnan courtyard. To sustain such a garden in a border city like Qianmo was a greater expense than the gardens of all Jiangnan's most lavish mansions. The osmanthus tree swayed in the night breeze. In the twinkling of an eye, Duan Hu landed atop it. Had Feng Xiao been present, he'd have seen that Duan Hu wasn't just an expert in finger techniques, his Qinggong was also exemplary. A man almost 7 feet tall perched atop a branch no thicker than a finger, yet the branch didn't snap or even shiver. This alone put him among the ranks of first-class experts. But as he raised his eyes and looked around, he saw nothing but flowers and trees, lush and evenly spaced. Other than the two servants running toward him, there was no one else. "Duan Hu, 20 years. It's been 20 years. He looked out over the garden. He refused to believe anyone could escape his sweeping gaze, no matter how well hidden. All was still. The servants looked up from the base of the tree, unsure what to do. "My lord, should we call someone?" Duan Hu didn't answer. In the quarter hour he'd been standing atop the tree, the woman's voice in his ears had continued to repeat the same 2 words. 20 years. 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Duan Hu had just joined a group of bandits and was still a nobody in the bandit stronghold. He longed to climb higher, to achieve greater things, to be surrounded by soft women and chests overflowing with gold and silver, just like the bandit chieftain. Whenever his band went down the mountain to plunder, he always rode at the forefront. Though he suffered many injuries, he also gained the respect of his superiors. Eventually, he replaced the 3rd chieftain and gradually climbed the ranks, transforming his mountain stronghold into the strongest group of horse-mounted bandits in the region. He'd amassed power and wealth until he'd become the Duan Hu of today. No one could achieve fame and success without some blood on their hands. Duanqihu was certain even those who sat in the pinnacle of imperial power were weighed down by blood debts, including the current emperors of Sui in southern Chun. Who among them hadn't cut their way through human flesh as one might hack apart melons? How else could they have seized such incredible power? Duanqihu smiled coldly. 20 years ago, he'd already killed too many people. If there was such a thing as ghosts, they'd have to line up for their vengeance. A nameless little ghost who'd popped up out of nowhere would never get a chance. He broke off a twig from the osmanthus tree and jumped down. His wrist twitched, and leaves from the twig shot out in all directions. The two servants were unprepared. The tender leaves instantly pierced their throats, and they collapsed to the ground before they'd even had a chance to scream. Blood pooled beneath their bodies, and the scent of blood rose into the air. The soft, sorrowful voice had fallen silent as well. So it really was someone playing tricks, Duanqihu thought to himself, face stony. He waved a hand, summoning another servant to drag the two corpses away. Someone else would clean up the garden. When he returned tomorrow, not a single drop of blood would remain. It would be pristine and peaceful, as if no one had ever died there at all. Duanqihu's mood lifted a little. When Duanqihu's wife heard he'd killed someone in the garden, she once again came to see him. His wife had been with him since the beginning, and stuck by his side through thick and thin. Though Duanqihu rarely spent the night with her these days, his respect was far greater for her than his concubine. When she arrived, he didn't drive her away. They sat together for a moment. Whatever's weighing on you, even if I can't help, I can still lend an ear. As inadequate as I may be, I will always be yours. These words brought Duanqihu no comfort. He furrowed his brow and asked, 20 years ago, do you remember anything significant that happened back then? Duanqihu's wife thought it over. At the end of that year, you returned to the mountain and said you'd bagged something big. You became the third chieftain soon after. Since then, our lives have gotten better and better. His wife had never accompanied him on raids, so she only knew so much. But Duanqihu, too, remembered that year as the one he'd become the third chieftain. It'd been an important turning point in his life, not one easily forgotten. That year, you returned from a long journey happier than ever. When I asked, all you said was that you'd landed a huge prize this time. You wouldn't tell me anything more. She sighed. I knew how you were making a living out there. I burn incense every day and pray to the bodhisattvas for your sake, so your past sins may be forgiven. If there should be any retribution, let it be borne by me, your wife. Duanqihu had grown impatient and was about to stand and leave, but at the word retribution, his expression shifted. Lady Duen paid no heed. The older she got, the less she could resist chattering. She continued to prattle on. Enough! Duanqihu leapt to his feet. It's late. You should rest. I'm going back. Husband! Lady Duen could only watch as he left with a flick of his sleeves. She didn't know what she'd said wrong. He'd been fine just a moment ago. Duanqihu returned to his room and sent everyone away. He lay in bed staring at the curtains over his head until drowsiness overcame him, and his eyelids grew heavy. But just as he was about to fall into a shallow slumber, the voice rang out again. Duanqihu, you owe me a life. Duanqihu's eyes snapped open, and he sprang upright. I am the master of my life and my fate. Even the heavens can't snatch my life from me. You've got no chance. A soul like you should have gone to the underworld long ago. Choose wisely, or don't blame me for beating you until you scatter. You'll never be able to reincarnate even if you want to. He snarled through gritted teeth, eyes bloodshot as he glared outside, but the voice continued unabated, sounding both near and far away. Duanqihu, pay blood with blood. Oh. Okay, anyway, sorry. The wind carried the faint scent of copper. Duanqihu. It was coming from the direction of the garden pool. If Duanqihu had been a man who sat around waiting to be killed, he would be dead 8 or 10 times over. He called for his 2 most trusted guards and rushed in the direction of the garden pool. The closer they got, the stronger the stench of blood grew. One guard cried out, "My lord, look!" Duan saw a corpse by the pond, one of the servants he'd killed earlier. "Didn't I tell them to clean this up?" he raged, thinking to find his slacking servants who had dumped the body here. But in the next moment, a cold, slimy gaze seemed to fix on the back of his neck. His hair stood on end. Danger! He turned and struck out with a palm, yet met only air. "Duan Hu." An icy female voice sounded in his ear from right where the guard should have been standing. Duan Hu had walked down countless dark paths and braved innumerous storms. He was no stranger to struggling at the limits of life and death, but at that moment he could no longer contain the terror in his heart. A savage expression came over his face and he roared, "Who the fuck are you? Show yourself!" In the Chiamoa County office the next morning, Gao Yi's restless hand slipped as he reached for the tea the maid was offering, sending the cup shattering to the ground. Hot tea splashed onto his clothes and boots, scalding the back of his hand. He yelped and leapt a foot into the air. The maid rushed to apologize, but Gao Yi waved her away, leaving sharp fragments littering the floor. He took out the tortoiseshell he used for divination with great care, but instead of his usual silent prayer, he sank into a stupor until a servant came to inform him guests had arrived. "Send them away," Gao Yi said impatiently. He was in no mood to receive anyone. "But sir," the servant exclaimed in disbelief, "the man is claiming to be the nephew of the king of Kucha. He said he saw something strange in the sky above the city last night, and that it was pointing to this building." Gao Yi's heart pounded. "Let him in." Within minutes, Cui Buchu and Feng Xiao stood inside the office. "Magistrate," Cui Buchu said at once, "there's an impure aura between your brows. The area has turned black. I fear you've been tainted with some kind of negative energy." All right, folks. So typically speaking, I would have tried to do one more chapter, but I've got a busy week ahead of me, so I was not able to do one more. But anyway, I wanted to go ahead and go through my notes, which I don't have a lot, so this won't be as much of a ramble bamble as usual. The first thing I wanted to comment on was Feng Xiao discovering that, Cui Buchu actually did share his real name with him. But he said that he started using that name at 10 and has forgotten the name he used before that. And I'm wondering if that dream that he had earlier in volume 1 is his name from the man that was holding him and then was like, "Grandpa, name this child." And what did he tell him to name him? Like Xiao something. And then was like, "We'll call him Step," which is Jie, because everybody be able to step over him. I wonder if that was him. And that was just like, a quote unquote memory, even though he wouldn't be able to remember something like that from being a baby. And then literally the only other couple of things I want to say is, who is this mystery man who revealed Cui Buchu and Feng Xiao's identities to Xing Mao? And do we already know him? And what's going on with Duan Hu and hearing this voice of whatever ghostly woman? And at first, actually, I thought maybe he was intoxicated and he was hearing things. But then because he heard them the next day, I was like, okay, no, I don't think it's intoxication. And so because I don't know the direction of this story, I've never read it before, I'm like, okay, are there truly going to be ghosts involved in this thing? Is there some kind of spirit? Or is this the work of someone? Guess we'll have to figure out later. The last thing I'll say, I thought it was funny how Feng Xiao was thinking about what else he could do to Cui Buchu just to like piss him off or whatever. But then he was like, wait, I just gotta win. I think I want to keep that for a few more days. Because he knows it's like, if Cui Buchu retaliates, he's going to be in for it. But it's hilarious because he wants to be in for it, but he does just want to like bask in his win for a few more seconds. I just thought that was so funny. But anyway, that was all I had to say. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions, and I will see you all tomorrow. Well, Einiman.